It was a Soligan, Germany kind of hunting knife. It wasn't very expensive, but it had a stag handle on it, and it had like a silver lion's head for a pommel. And I used to think that was the baddest ass knife in the world.
I came to SHOT Show 2016 in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I asked people this question.
Tell me about your first knife or gun or both.
I think my first knife was actually a gift from a friend, and it was a Swiss Army knife.
First knife was a Swiss Army knife.
It was a red Swiss Army knife, one of the mid-range Swiss Army knives.
First knife was a Swiss Army knife that I sort of earned, I guess.
My first knife, actually, I think it was a Swiss Army Classic that I found in the bark chips underneath the swing set when I was a little kid.
Which I actually still have, and it used to be in my emergency bag in my trunk, but I kind of want to retire it from just sitting around not being used, so it's going back into my EDC setup. Victorinox, and probably has maybe 8 or 9 tools, and I think the one I used most after the knife was the toothpick.
I don't remember the model, I just remember it being a little red knife with a white X on it. I was just a little kid, and that was the knife that I would whittle with or cut rope with, whatever.
I hadn't even sort of known about those before. I saw it in the store window somewhere, and for weeks I pestered my parents to allow me to get one. And being a knife, you know, your mom or people like that don't want you to have it, but my dad eventually let me buy one, and I scrimped and scraped my money and was able to get it, and then I promptly lost it within a week somewhere in a field.
A friend hit me in the mouth when I was a little kid with the dirt clod. We were having dirt clod wars, and I started crying, and this gentleman, we were at a party of some sort, a gentleman put me in his truck to stop crying, and he gave me a Swiss Army knife, told me if I could open every blade I could keep it. Probably took me about an hour, and I opened every blade, and I got to keep it.
My favorite knife today is probably the Wave, which is a Leatherman tool, of course, and I just love it because of the versatility of the product. I use the knife every single day, I use the scissors every single day, and I use it for all kinds of things that I just don't know what I'm going to be doing.
My first knife was a buck hunter, an old buck that my dad gave me. My dad gave it to me when I was 7 years old. I remember opening it for the first time, cutting my finger, and my parents getting into a big argument about responsibility on my dad's part. That was awesome.
A typical 2-blade folder, completely worn out, blade in terrible condition, but still it was a knife, and I got to have my first knife.
My first knife was a buck hunting knife. I don't remember which model.
First knife was a buck knife. I actually handed that down to my oldest boy.
If I remember, it was a buck 110, so there's a little plug for them. But hey, they're great knives.
I had some crappy knives that my dad gave me through the years, but my favorite knife, I think, was the one that my dad, as a Ford air controller, flew in Vietnam with. It was a buck Skinner. He gave that Skinner to me and said, hey, this is one of my combat knives I flew with in Vietnam, and he gave it to me before he died, and that meant so much to me, because I would look at the pictures of his mounted up gear before every mission. He had like his M16, grenades, all the flying gear, the helmet, and that buck knife was in that pile of gear. And when he gave that knife to me, it was like, I was stoked. And to this day, my brother has it now, but I haven't shown it on camera, but that was probably my overall favorite knife ever.
Tell me about your first knife or gun or both.
One of my first knives was a Sykes-Fairbairn style commando knife, dagger. Yeah, my mother bought me one. I just loved everything to do with knives and martial arts and whatnot, so I had a cool little knife collection. Unfortunately, I left most of them when I was a child, well, a teenager in New Zealand when we moved to the States, but that Sykes-Fairbairn commando dagger was probably my the one that I remember being my first knife.
My first knife was a little folder with a drop point blade. It was white, and I bought it at Old Faithful in Yellowstone National Park.
The first knife is, I'm sorry, I'm terrible with the models, but it's a Spyderco. Nutnfancy's gonna kill me.
Back in the day, I think it was United Cutlery. My dad used to distribute other brands. Had this big Indiana Jones knife, and it was just gorgeous. And he gave me that thing, and I had it forever and ever. And that was the first knife that really just stands out, just being awesome.
My first knife was a Schrade. I believe it's a sharp finger. I did a video on my channel of it. that my dad had given it to me when I was about 13, and that was kind of like a rite of passage for me, like as a boy coming into manhood, that he gave me that blade, and with that came the responsibility of good ownership and good knife safety with that. So I have fond memories of my dad giving me that charade sharp finger as a kid.
Yeah, I really don't remember my first knife. I think it was a pocket knife that my grandfather gave me. Just an old, like a Barlow type pocket knife, and I think I still have it to this day in my collection in a drawer somewhere. But I've had knives basically my whole life on and off, and I can't really remember what the very first one I got, but that's one of the first ones for sure.
First knife was a benchmade Sentinel, designed by Alan Elishewitz. It had a titanium liners that were anodized blue with G10 handle slams.
Well, I remember my second one is a Sabenza. That's the first year when I went to college.
My first knife was a wooden handled Barlow that my dad gave me when I was 6 years old, which was not as sharp as his knives, and I pestered him until he sharpened it, and I immediately pushed it completely through my hand.
My first knife was a Boy Scout knife. It was ridiculously sharp, and my mom said be very careful with it. So the day I got my knife, I invited my friend over, and I got it out and I said, look how sharp it is, and I literally sliced my finger open.
First knife I ever had was a little 2-blade slip joint. Actually ended up having it taken away. I think I was about 5 years old because I got in trouble for brandishing it out back of the house to a friend. So I think I didn't get another one for a few years.
Tell me about your first knife or gun or both if you like.
And my first knife was a Gerber, an AR 3.0 is what it was called, and I think they still sell it, but I've used that knife to help in a CPR situation where I had a knife nobody else did because we were all at PT and somebody had collapsed and they had a heart issue in the heat in Texas. So we used that knife to help resuscitate them. You never know when they're going to come in useful. But yeah, I still have that knife.
It was one of those utensil knives, like it's split apart and you had a knife, fork, and spoon.
My first knife was when I was in the Boy Scouts. It was a Camp King. It was one of those, had a whole bunch of little blades in it.
My first knife was a Kershaw. I don't remember the model.
And that was the knife that my dad let me have when I was like 7 or whatever. I mean, it was a real knife, but I don't know what kind of garbage steel it was. But it was cool having something like that.
And had the knife blade, the awl, bottle opener, can opener, all those things. And I pretty much carried that through Boy Scouts until I got a little bit older, and then I got myself an old timer, real nice old timer.
Had the kind of rainbow tint to it from the heat treating, and I don't know why it was my favorite because I don't like that now, but I was so impressed by it, and I thought I was the coolest kid around to have that Kershaw knife at Boy Scout camp.
My first knife was the first one I made about 17 years ago. It was my first knife. I actually, that Mike, my boss, had let me play with, you know, on the grinder and stuff, and I still have that. I still have that, and I keep it as on the wall as memory.
My dad used to get ready to deer hunt, you know, late October every year, and he had this fixed blade hunting knife. It was a Soligan, Germany kind of hunting knife. It wasn't very expensive, but it had a stag handle on it, and it had like a silver lion's head for a pommel. And I used to think that was the baddest ass knife in the world. And he always laid his like rifle against the wall, and he had his leather belt, and he had his hip knife on there, and it was just totally like, that was like a man. That was man stuff. And you always smelled that spent gunpowder and the Hopi's number 9 and linseed oil or mink oil or whatever he rubbed down his leather with. And those are smells and things that I remember that kind of made me fall in love with the outdoor industry, with the hunting and the fishing industry, and really probably inspired my love for knives early on, influenced me in a great way.
My
My first centerfire rifle was a Colt AR-15 A2 Sporter 2. I think I may have dated myself a little bit there, but I still have that rifle as well. I tricked my mother into buying it for me. I convinced her it was a 22 rifle, and she bought it for me as a birthday present. I was still in high school, and again, I'll never get rid